I think one of the big things is to understand that, like I said in the beginning, is we're all addicted to comfort. Everybody has an idol of the heart, something that they go to instead of God. And if, for the listeners to just think about, whenever adversity strikes or they don't get their agenda, what do they go to first?
Welcome to the Church Digital Podcast. Through this podcast, we'll talk about the technological innovations within the church. But more than tech for tech itself, we'll address deeper questions. Is disciple making possible digitally? How should we approach the digital mission field? Can a biblically grounded church operate in digital space? Oh, and where does the metaverse and artificial intelligence fit into all of this? Whether you're a big or small church, the Church Digital's goal is to help churches like yours learn to be a multiplying church, digitally and physically. And now here's your host, Jeff Reed.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to the Church Digital Podcast. We are live once again, broadcasting this right now on Twitch. Jeff Reed here, founder of the Church Digital, doing episode 312 on addictions. Now remember, we're in this season of digital and mental health, really created by co-host here, Megan Carter. Megan, you did a great job putting the season together. As we're coming into 312, talking about addictions, any thoughts as you're walking in?
Man, I don't know. I've loved this season. I've loved being able to walk through so many different avenues of mental health, and there's so many we didn't even hit on. We could go into so much more detail of different things, and even just the episodes we went through already with every guest. It was incredible. So I'm really excited about this one today too, because I think a lot of people have people in their life where there's something they've struggled with. So this is a really big topic that we need to talk about. And it deals with in people that you're in the physical with, or just online. We have that in both spaces. So I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yeah, as we've gone deeper into this season, we've definitely gone higher up the, I don't want to say pay grade, but higher up the mental health scale of intelligence here at the conversation. We opened up with some more digital ministry type people that are struggling with or have adapted and are working through some mental health issues. But here with today, we're bringing in an expert, somebody who is certified, who has done the work and is actually a doctor in this space. And so I want to introduce Dr. Karl Benzio with the American Association of Christian Counselors. Doctor, hey, thanks for joining the stream here and being part of this season with us.
Hey, thanks, guys. Looking forward to this, and just an honor and feel blessed to serve you guys in this way.
Yeah, so Dr. Karl, we did some work with AACC and Dr. Karl back with some glue stuff, and really just have loved the conversation. We wanted to do a conversation centered around neurodivergence sometime last year, and it kind of just fell off the radar. And a lot of my gaming friends, that's a really big thing. And so we'll come back to that conversation at some point. But as we're looking at this season, really the idea of addictions kind of came up in the conversation. Not only ministering to and dealing with people that are dealing with addictions, but also, in many ways, the areas that we're doing ministry are in themselves addictive areas, like getting addicted to mobile devices or getting addicted to virtual reality. Or, it's funny, I had a CEO as right when I was writing the book for the virtual reality church and virtual reality book. My CEO of a Christian tech company says to me, "Hey, Jeff, what's the church going to do when virtual reality actually becomes a better reality than the physical reality that we're in? And more people get addicted to that." And I was like, that's a great question. And so I almost would see what Dr. Karl's response is to something like that. But I'm really looking forward to this conversation here. And I know that Megan's put a lot of work into the ideas centered around even just addiction and mental health and digital. And so, hey, Megan, why don't you kick us off here in the conversation?
Yeah, I think we should just start with let's give a definition of what addiction is, and then kind of just go into you mentioned a little bit, Jeff, is that it's a lot of times we think of maybe substance or different things like that, but there's other things that you can get addicted to. So maybe go into what it is, and then what are some things maybe we don't think of that we can become addicted to?
Yeah. So addiction. The CDC lists the leading causes of death in the United States, and cardiovascular and cancer and then accidents are usually the top three. But if you really parse into the numbers, abortion is number one, and addiction is real close with abortion. Cardiovascular is about 700,000, but addiction kills anywhere from 850,000 to 1 million people a year in the United States. So we're talking about something that's really significant here, not just, okay, well, we have a couple people that have an alcohol problem or smoking or whatever. This is one of the leading causes of death in the United States, addiction. So a definition, sort of a layman's term, definition for addiction is when a person has trouble stopping a substance or a behavior, even though they have repeated disruptive consequences. So they have trouble stopping a substance or a behavior, even though there's repeated disruptive consequences. And in our scientific psychiatric realm, we have this book called the DSM-5, and the DSM-5 lists these 11 criteria that a person needs to meet, a certain set of them, using more than usual, unsuccessful efforts to cut down. It's disruptive in their life, interferes with work, school, or relationships. There can be tolerance where you need more to get the same high. You can have withdrawal symptoms from some, not just substances, but things like we talk about screen addictions. You can have a withdrawal from even screen addictions or pornography. So we can get into that a little bit later. So that's sort of some of the definition of it. To me, a biblical definition is when we pursue something other than God. We pursue something other than God in a repetitive, habitual, or patterned way to get our needs met. So God gives us, he knows we're going to be addicts. We're designed to worship him. He knows we're going to be addicts. So he gives us these two commandments, the first two commandments, thou shalt have no other God before me. And when a person gets addicted to something, that thing, that object, that addiction object becomes the God in their life. It becomes something that everything else in their life revolves around. That addiction object sort of forms the orbits of everything else in their life. And he says, don't fashion anything, in the skies above, on the earth here, or even below the earth to worship, because he knows that that's going to be what we're sort of called to or sort of pulled to in our flesh, to worship something other than him. And so that's what that addiction process is. So pursuing something other than God in a repetitive, habitual, or patterned way to get our needs met. I believe, looking at, I've treated patients for 35 years and in my own life, that we're all addicts. We're all addicted to comfort. So if you see the things that we do in our life, we're all pursuing comfort, whether we have a job so we can have a roof over our head. And so I'm comfortable as a dad because my kids have shoes and have food and those kind of things. We just don't like discomfort. We're great at telling other people, hey, no pain, no gain. Keep on pushing. But when we have pain in our lives, we don't like it at all. And it's amazing what we look to relieve that discomfort or relieve that pain in our lives. So oftentimes addictions sort of sneak up on people. And, I think it's real important to understand the 6 stages of addiction. So there's 6 stages to addiction, and a person usually doesn't go through each one linearly, like, okay, I'm going to spend time at this time, at this time, and this, and go through. But for the most part, they do go through these 6 stages if they're really in their throes of addiction. The first one is experimental. When, there's no agenda, they just sort of, use a substance because, I've heard about this thing and I just want to try it out. Some people stop at that. Some people continue on to recreational, where it's usually in a social setting. They're with a bunch of buds. Somebody has something and, okay, I'll try it out, whether it's a substance, whether it's, pornography, whether it's a video game or whatever. Then the third stage, this is the critical stage. This is circumstantial use. So circumstantial use, it means whenever a person uses that particular addiction object, we're going to talk about chemicals right now, substances, alcohol, caffeine, heroin, painkillers, stimulants, whatever. They get some benefit from that chemical. So whether they're studying for a test and they need to stay up longer, so they use some, their buddy's Adderall, the roommates, Ritalin, they use a little cocaine. They're nervous about going to a party and talking to girls, so they'll drink some alcohol. A lot of stress at home, so they need a drink or they need to smoke some weed. So circumstantial use is that very dangerous stage, because a person is tricked into thinking that, wow, this addiction object actually has some benefit for me. It sort of gets me out of something. It fixes a problem that I'm struggling with. So whenever we get tricked into thinking, oh, instead of being harmful, this thing is actually beneficial for me, then we start to use it more. We start to apply it to a whole bunch of other different issues and struggles that we have. We call that regular use, stage 4. Then we start to usually get some consequences. Sometimes people back off when those consequences start adding up. Sometimes people don't. And then they go into that intensified use where legal, financial, relationship, sometimes physical issues start to occur. Then the 6th stage is compulsive, where that person just has a hard time stopping on their own. They've tried to stop. It just becomes such a sort of innate part of who they are, that they are a compulsive user, and they really need some outside intervention, whether a treatment center, a significant intervention. They need to be physically separated from the object that they're addicted to be able to get some relief. So those are the 6 stages. Again, that circumstantial stage when Satan tricks us into thinking, wow, that whatever that addiction object is, it's beneficial for me. It makes my life easier. It solves a problem for me. That's the dangerous step, because then we start to think, oh, really, it's not that bad. I can use it in a whole lot of different ways, and my life is going to be better, when in reality, it leads to destruction. Nothing really better comes from it. It's tough to kick these addiction objects because there's an underlying psychospiritual problem that we're dealing with. So for a long time, we've always thought addiction was the primary problem. So we look to most of the treatment facilities out there that treat addictions, treat addiction, and they don't treat the underlying problem. They look at addiction as the primary issue. And so they try to behaviorally help the person stay away from using that addiction object. So I started Honey Lake Clinic, a treatment center, because in all my years of treating people, I always saw that there was an underlying issue, that circumstantial phase, or something underneath that they're trying to self-medicate, trying to escape from, trying to distract from, trying to heal from. And so their addiction object is their attempt to get at that underlying issue. So it's tough to kick because usually people don't have an awareness of the underlying issue, whether it's something that happened 30 years ago, something that happened 5 years ago, something that happened 20 minutes ago. There's hurts and losses and struggles that pile up along the way. And because we don't ever, I don't say don't ever, because it's difficult for us to have a lot of good awareness about what's going on inside and how those ripples sort of play out into this addiction process. That's why it's really hard for a lot of people to stop their addiction, because they're trying to do these behavioral things and not really get at the psychological and the spiritual aspects that are underneath. Addiction objects feed the flesh. So we get tricked into, again, that circumstantial of feeling good, and we get a dopamine release in that reward pathway that makes us feel good and gives us a euphoria. So that flesh feels good. Say, oh, wow, this thing must be good for me. And the other thing that happens is when we turn to this addiction object in a repetitive, frequent way, those other skills that we should be growing, that we should be getting better at, that we should be using psychologically, relationally, emotionally, spiritually, we're not using those skills anymore. We're not growing those skills. So those skills are starting to atrophy or wither away, and now they're not available for us. So now the only thing that we have is that addiction object. So we just keep on going to that because our other skills are locked deep down inside, or they're even have atrophied and withered away. So we don't even think that we have those skills anymore. And so that's why it's hard for people once they get into that regular or intensified use. It's just really hard for them to dig out because, some people say that, you're the emotional age that you first started using. So if you started using at age 15 or 16 and now you're 35, your emotional age is still 16. That's not necessarily fully accurate, but the idea is you haven't developed those skills from 16 to 25 or 35 that other people have developed to try to dig out of the psycho-spiritual struggle that you're in.
It's interesting. I've never taken that into consideration with addiction. That it's that there's part of you, because you're adapting with the addiction, there's part of you that's atrophying or that's weakening because you're not dealing with it at the emotional level.
Yeah, so if you think of a person wearing a cast, their leg is broken, they're wearing a cast. Well, the cast is somewhat helpful. It gets them through a particular issue. But if the cast is on too long, if they're using it too frequently, now all those muscles underneath atrophy. So when they take the cast off, they can't walk. They need physical therapy now to rebuild back up. And so psychologically and emotionally and spiritually, that's the same thing that happens. Those things atrophy. And that's what people don't have a realization or an understanding of.
What do we look for to understand at an interpersonal level what's atrophying or not? Like if there's someone here that's listening to this that's struggling with an addiction, Like what are the symptoms, or what are the tell signs, or how do you work through that at what's atrophy?
Yeah. So those things that we call emotional intelligence. So people being aware of their emotions that are going on inside, being able to understand those emotions, these uncomfortable feelings that we have, anger, sadness, we don't like them, but that's the warning system that God has given us to let us know that something's not going right, or there's potential danger. There's like the red light on the dashboard. We're never thrilled when our red light on our dashboard goes, lights up, but that it's really good that happens, because that lets us know, hey, there's a problem that we need to pay attention to. So whenever people have trouble identifying, talking about, processing those emotions, that's a big problem. When people are impulsive, they don't think through their decisions. They become sort of rash, sort of crude decision makers. Whenever they become isolated, because of shame, because of guilt, the opposite of addiction is belonging. And so when a person is starting to get addicted to something, it starts to take up their space, their relational space. They develop a relationship with that addiction object, and now they're sort of pushing out the other people, partly because they don't have space for those other people, partly because some of their psychological and emotional skills are starting to atrophy, so they're not a really good person, in relationships. They don't, hold up their end of the relationship bargain a lot of times. But then also those people are telling them, hey, what you're doing isn't good for you, or that's not healthy, or you're making a mistake. And the addict doesn't want to hear, that message. So they're pulling away from those people. So their island is drifting farther and farther away, from the mainland. So that sort of isolation that occurs. Sometimes there's a lot of blame. They blame their boss, they blame their wife, they blame their kids, they blame I don't have enough money, or I can't get to treatment, or whatever. There's always looking sort of at an external focus of why they're struggling, and not really looking internally of what psychologically and spiritually is going on inside me that's the cause of my poor decision making and my sort of immature behavior and conduct. So those are some signs that temperamental, temper tantrums, being impulsive, not making sense sometimes. Sometimes you'll see things that don't line up, because now they're starting to lie. They're starting to, they got lame excuses. And, well, you told me, you're 2 years ago you were out because your grandmother died, but now your grandmother died again, so just things just aren't lining up. You see these inconsistencies in their life and their stories.
Yeah. And I think that there is such a huge stigma attached to addiction. And our church works a lot with recovery homes and transitional homes and those kind of things. And we have a pretty large population that have been through addiction or different things like that. And that's really changed my view, is like getting and meeting with the people and talking with them and hearing their experience. So that's helped me so much. But what is something that we could do to help change, to get rid of that stigma? Because obviously that's not everybody falls under one category, that they don't all they're not all going to let you down. They're not all going to do this. There are some that are really trying to work hard, and a lot is fighting against them. So what's some things that maybe we can do to help with that?
I think one of the big things is to understand that, like I said in the beginning, is we're all addicted to comfort. Everybody has an idol of the heart, something that they go to instead of God. And if, for the listeners to just think about, whenever adversity strikes or they don't get their agenda, what do they go to first? It could be a substance. It could be a thought pattern. It could be an emotion. Very rarely do we go to God and say, boy, God, my agenda just didn't happen. What are you trying to teach me? What do what's your plan? What's your goal right now? I remember, one time whenever I was on a missions trip and, we were in Kenya and, we had all this great PowerPoint set up and, we had worked through our talks, but there was no electricity. And so we're trying to figure out all these ways to sort of pull together electricity in this little shack and stuff. And, we're a generator and this and that. And, one of our hosts comes back and says, hey, did we pray? And like, oh yeah, boy, I guess we could have prayed about that problem first. But, whether it's productivity, whether it's our own skills, whether it's our education, whether it's our IQ, whether it's our ability to make people laugh, people pleasing, work, exercise. There's a bunch of different, those process addictions, screens, social media that we, have to soothe ourselves. So there's a whole bunch of things that happen. A donut, ice cream. You look at our church population, and we have a lot of obesity. A lot of people are addicted to food that they won't say anything, but they'll have a judgmental attitude about the person that comes in with tattoos that might have just gotten out of rehab or just got out of detox, and wow, that person has a problem, but yet all their health is off the chart, because of their obesity and their, difficulty managing decisions around food. So I think just to be able to have the idea that, hey, we all struggle. We all have, Jesus had perfect brain chemistry. All the rest of us don't. We all have psychological struggles, and we all have an addiction. We're all addicted to comfort, and each one of us has several different process addictions, whether it's power, whether it's control, people pleasing, victim mentality, anger. We all have something that we go to in a repetitive, habitual, or patterned way to get our needs met instead of going to God. And I think when we sort of put everybody on an even playing field, that helps a person have a little bit more compassion and empathy for somebody who has a struggle in an area that I don't. So I might not have a struggle with heroin, but I had a significant struggle with alcohol. I ended up in jail for 6 counts of aggravated assault, a convicted felon, whenever I was back in my 20s because of my alcohol use, anxiety, and anger, and a whole bunch of fights, and just, the attitude that I had. But there were other things that I didn't struggle with that, gambling. I never struggled with gambling. I could easily look at a gambling addict and say, well, how can you do that? That's so stupid. Why would you be wasting your money on that? And he's looking at me saying, well, you're an alcoholic. You were in jail for aggravated assault. Like, why would you do anything like that? Gambling, I don't hurt anybody gambling, whereas you were beating up on people and getting beat up. So I think for us to all understand that, hey, we all have addictions. I think that levels the playing field. I think to look at the idea that we need to look at spirit, mind, and body, that the addiction isn't the primary thing. There's a lot of hurt underneath. Everybody has the one thing I love about my job as a psychiatrist is I get to ask people very personal questions and say, hey, tell me about your story. Tell me about your life. And it's just amazing to hear the different things that, a person will relate to you that helps you understand how they got to this point now. And there's, ups and celebrations and highs, and there's downs and hurts and losses and, pain and sorrow. And I think if we took time to listen to each other, hear each other's stories, to see what life is and what it is to walk in that person's life, to wear that person's shoes, and go through the last month or the last week or those it would give us a lot more empathy, a lot more compassion, a lot more appreciation of that person and their story, and how to sort of protect it, honor it, dignify it, respect it. Just like the Good Samaritan, he didn't really ask the guy, questions. He said, wow, this person needs help. And I'm going to jump in. Maybe he did a stupid thing. Maybe he was an alcoholic and he got trashed and he's on the wrong road or whatever. He didn't do any of that. He says, boy, this person needs help. How do I jump in and help this person? I think, if we had that kind of attitude, just assuming that a person, is struggling and they need our help, God wants us to, there's the story of Lazarus. Lazarus is dying. They send out messengers to Jesus, say, hey, your buddy's, he might die. We need your help. And he's like, boy, I got stuff to do. I'm not going to make it. Jesus gets back late. Lazarus is dead for 4 days. Jesus is sad that I think the people just don't get it of who he really is. He says, roll back the stone. They roll back the stone. He says, Lazarus, rise and come forth. Lazarus rises and come forth. The next thing Jesus says to the people next to Lazarus is, hey, unbind him, because Lazarus had these death wrappings around his face, around his body. They interfered with his perspective, his vision, interfered with his movement, his walk, his freedom. He didn't say, hey, Lazarus, unbind yourself. He told the people next to him, hey, unbind him. And we all have death wrappings. We all have I call it psychological baggage, right, is what we call it. But we all have those death wrappings that, none of us got a brain transplant. We become saved. Our sin slate is washed clean, but our memory banks aren't washed clean. So we got all that stuff that we've come into this Christian walk with, and we need help with those death wrappings, unbinding. And I think we need to look at all of us, that we all have death wrappings, and we all need help unbinding. And that's why we need to come alongside, and God has put us in. He's built us for relationship, and he's put us in these different size communities so that we can help unbind each other and help get unbound by others. So we all need help unbinding ourselves, and we all need to give some help to others in their unbinding process.
Yeah, I'm going to flip it on you just a little bit because you said in your daily life, you ask people their stories. I want to ask your story just a little bit, but really like, what was that turning point for you? Like, what was that moment that you started to see a shift and a change?
Yeah. I grew up and, ever since I was 5 years old, I've always wanted to help people with decision making. God laid that on my heart at a very young age. But as a young kid, at 4, I started school, started kindergarten. I was a pretty good reader, so I went to a 3rd grade class to read as a kindergartner. But I had a terrible stutter, a really difficult time stuttering. And so people would make fun of me. They'd call me names. They'd hit me on the back of the head to get the words out. And so as a stutterer, you're in your head a lot because you're trying to figure out, well, what words can I start a sentence with so I don't stammer? Once I got on a roll, I could speak pretty decently, but it was just getting those first words out. So you're in your head a lot. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. And so, you move into a place and you're trying to get into that inner circle, but then you move and you lose those friendships. And then you move into another one and leave, move into another one. So at a point you start, well, why do I even make friends? I'm just going to leave them. So it became more isolated, withdrawn, had some anxiety, had some depression. I was really good in sports. So I did things on a national level, like age 12, 13, national TV and stuff. So I was able to get into some of that circle of my male peers, but I wasn't able to get into that inner circle. And that really aided me, that process. And so to try to fit in, to try to be liked, to be admired and accepted by my peer group, got into a lot of inappropriate behaviors, and alcohol being one of them, and end up drinking more and more and more, end up losing an Air Force ROTC scholarship at Duke, I end up losing a baseball scholarship. I played baseball in college, I got caught cheating on an engineering exam in college and got put on academic probation and almost kicked out of school, almost flunked out of school. I'm a really good test taker, so I did well on the MCATs to get into medical school, but I didn't get into any school. My home school in New Jersey, I got put on the waiting list. And a couple of days before the semester started, I get this call. And the registrar's office called and she goes, "Karl, it's a miracle." I'm like, "What do you mean it's a miracle?" She goes, "Well, we've never gone this low on the waiting list before, but we've got to your number. Do you still want to come?" I was like, "Yeah, I want to come." "Well, can you afford it?" It's like, "Well, just hook me up with your student loan office and I'll get the money." So I go into medical school, and in my head, I'm thinking, wow, all those things I'm doing got me to where I want to go. So I can just continuing doing them. So I continued drinking, anger, fights, inappropriate behaviors in other areas too, and ended up getting arrested for 6 counts of aggravated assault and felony charges in jail. And it was at that time in jail, this is the big turning point, that Jesus said to me, "Karl, you made me your savior when you were a little kid, but you never made me the Lord of your life." And I did. I answered, altar calls, I don't know, bazillion. Who wants to burn in hell forever, right? When you're raised in the church. But you never made me the Lord of your life. He says, if you make me the Lord of your life, I'm going to teach you things about decision making, which is what I was studying. I was always enamored with decision making. I'm going to teach you things about decision making. They're going to allow you to renew your mind, transform your life, and help you transform other people's lives as well. And when I heard Lord, I heard authority. When I heard authority, I heard author. And when I heard author, I realized that I had always thought I was the most qualified person to write the book. How does Karl get the most out of life instruction manual? I loved me more than anybody else loved me. I cared for me. I knew my mistakes. I knew my weaknesses. I knew my desires. I knew what I wanted out of my future better than anybody else. So I'm obviously the one who's most qualified. And as I would sort of follow that instruction manual, boy, that chapter didn't work. I'd rip it out, write another one. It didn't work. Rip it out, write another one. And when I heard Lord, authority, author, I realized the second big turning point was God is the most qualified person to write How Does Karl Get the Most Out of Life instruction manual. And he did. The Bible, the best instruction book for living every day. And so as I saw that, wow, if I want to be better at decision making, who's the perfect decision maker? Jesus. So I got into the Gospels and I started studying Jesus' decision making. And it was about a 2 or 3 year process of me sort of digging out, was in therapy, getting out of jail, sort of getting my life back in order. God brought a great woman into my life that loved me unconditionally, forgave me, and I was able to sort of see myself and see how God saw me in a different way, and how God sort of related me not as sort of that angry, judgmental, demeaning God, but somebody who was just loving, caring, always pursuing me, sort of like my wife was. And gave me three, wonderful daughters that sort of brought out a softer side instead of my angry, growing up in that Italian sort of household, an angry background. And my life has been amazing ever since that. But those were the two main turning points, making him the Lord of my life, which, I'm obviously still struggle at that. I'm not perfect at that, but I do it way better than I used to do. And really looking at the Bible as that instruction manual. And that's what we try to teach patients through my practice and in Honey Lake Clinic, how to really engage that relationship with God, seeing him as the Lord, but a Lord that's a loving, compassionate, pursuing, forgiving Lord. And then he's got the instruction manual. How do we, as I work with people that struggle with addictions, that big step of humility, how do you, are you ready to decide that your way isn't working, your instruction manual isn't working, you're not the one who's best qualified to write the instruction manual of how do you get the most out of life, that here's this book that has been proven over the centuries, but even our science now shows that these principles in the Bible actually change brain chemistry, allow us to psychologically and spiritually grow to lead, free, abundant, healthy, flourishing lives. And in the healing process, what has been amazing for me is to see what Satan intended for evil, right? All those mistakes I made, those stupid things that I did, the addictions that I had, the many people that I had hurt, the hurt that I had absorbed, God has been able to turn that around, not only to help in my healing process, but for that to be an agent in other people's healing. And I think people that are struggling, with whatever it is, depression, anxiety, we're talking about addiction here. As you're struggling with addiction, there's underlying issues. But as you come to freedom in your addiction, which I believe cure is possible, not just in our secular world where, hey, this is something you have to live with for the rest of your life. But I do think full transformation is available to us in this lifetime. But that's the superpower that Satan wants to keep sidelined. That superpower, that story, we're talking about stories, that healing, that comfort that you've been given. Now you're going to be able to utilize that to help other people that see their story in you, that hear you when you talk about, you say, wow, I was arrested too, or wow, I had this problem too, or wow, I got abused too, or wow, that person can understand. He can empathize with me. He can be compassionate. He can understand why I think the way I do, or why I make the mistakes I make. And so many times people that have struggled, they've come through their struggle, but they're ashamed of that struggle. So they don't want to share it with anybody else. But through our pain comes our purpose. Right. And so, in that pain, as we are able to engage it and see God bring healing into that very difficult space, that's where we start to find maybe here there's some purpose for that pain. And here's how God wants to use that, not only in my healing and growth process, but some of the people he's going to bring into my life. That story is going to be impactful and powerful. And my superpower, I get to unleash to be able to be salt and light in other people's lives as well. And whenever I see patients start to get to that end where not only are they getting healing, but they're also being a catalyst for other people's healings, their eyes light up and they just are so bright and so empowered in that process and so engaged by the Holy Spirit to just continue to walk in that power.
I love that. I love the idea of people being a catalyst and helping others and using their experiences to minister and to help others that are struggling with that. A lot of the people that we work with, Dr. Karl, are bivocational ministers. We're talking not seminary trained, college graduates, or even not even that, but it's people, just Jimmy Bob, normal people. We call them normies that are doing ministry and empowering them to do that. So here's my question, because, I've had experiences where people jump in, and dealing with addictions, and we're having conversations. Another episode coming up is like dealing with people that are going through suicidal seasons and crisis, seasons and things like that. And so there are people that are very deep into, yes, I want to help these people. And then there are people that are, well, that's the job of the pastor. Let me get you connected to a pastor for that. In your opinion, what can a normal person, like what level can they do? What level should they hand off to a pastor, to a professional? Like what level are they getting involved versus triage they hand off to somebody else? Like what's a good role that maybe we could operate off of?
Jeff, that's a great question. And, so many times we see it as, very binary. Either I'm involved or I'm not, and somebody else is involved. And I like to look at it more as, hey, we're a team coming together to act as a team. So even though somebody needs to be bumped up to me, the clinical expert psychiatrist, I don't want the other people to fall out of their life and say, oh, well, it's past my pay grade. I'm just going to pass it off to the psychiatrist. We need those people in, that ministry that they're volunteering with, like, in that valet ministry or the hospitality ministry. If they're in that home fellowship, whether online or, in a, bricks and mortar home kind of thing, that in that home fellowship, rubbing shoulders with them, encouraging them, bring a prayer partner with them. If there's people in the church that are having an addiction ministry, and so they have a little bit more understanding, there's getting peer support, and there's a facilitator of some kind of curriculum, in that meeting. I want that person to be involved. If there's a therapist, I want that person to be involved. If there's a marriage therapist working on how do we reconcile this marriage, and we help them understand and start to reconnect with each other. So it's not just, hey, we're just going to pass it off in this very sort of linear, it's just one at a time, but hey, hopefully we're all coming together to help this person unbind, as a team. And so to be able to have that kind of mentality, and then to figure out, well, what is my role based on my involvement with this person? A good friend, David Hager, who's an OBGYN. I do a lot of work at Focus on the Family with a bunch of physicians, and he's one of them. He wrote a book called On the Way, with the idea that, Jesus is usually going to a destination where he has a game plan, and ministry is going to happen at that destination. But often in the passage, it says, well, on the way, so-and-so comes up to him, the bleeding woman or the blind man or the lame person, and he's doing ministry there. So wherever we're at in our life, there's going to be on the way stuff that God is going to bring into our life that we're going to need to do, that we're called upon to do, that we're going to be a good Samaritan in some way. And so, first of all, just to embark on your own healing journey so that you have some inner sense of, who God is, who you are, how can you continue to have an understanding of, well, where am I on that psychological maturity scale? Am I a 2 out of 10? Am I a 3 out of 10? Well, I want to continue to move my needle, because God is going to bring people into my life, and he's going to want to use me to be able to speak into these people's lives. And the better I can to be able to respect, somebody, to honor their story, to listen, to ask questions, to be curious, not in a nosy, gossipy way, but in a compassionate, empathic way. Hey, I'm here with you. I want to help you. What do you need? And if I can supply that, great. And if I can't supply that, hey, let me help you find the person in our church or our community who can supply, for that need. And if I have to drive you to that appointment, if you need a dinner to be brought over for the kids so you can get to that, whatever that is, we all have skills. Our care team at our church has about 70 different people in it. We have psychiatrists, we have nurses, we have, various different levels of skills, but a lot of them are normies, in that process. But we've helped them with some, very short kind of programming, with some education, with some in-services, but we want to help them in their healing process so they have a heart that's open and that can be led by the Spirit to be able to, whatever that unbinding role that they have in a person's life, how can they sense what that is, and to be able to deliver that, and to know what their lane is, to know that, hey, I'm not going to be the psychiatrist, I'm not going to be prescribing this guy meds, I'm not going to be able to say, hey, that's a withdrawal symptom, you need to go. I need to get them to somebody else who has a little bit more understanding of, oh, this person's in withdrawal, they need to be able to get to this kind of level of care to be able to help that.
Is there one more question on my side, is there any hesitancy to lean into addictions that are complementary to what you have? Like, if I'm dealing with alcohol, I don't want to minister to somebody or help someone that's also going through it, because that might be triggering to me? Or is it healthier to work with someone that is in a similar area because of the symbiotic relationship of that, being able to pull them out?
Yeah, that's a great question. To me, there's whenever a person has a sexual addiction or pornography addiction, then working with the opposite sex or working in situations that can trigger those, that's probably the most difficult one that you really need to have good boundaries and good lanes to. Working with people that struggle with a very similar addiction that either you're currently struggling with or have struggled with in the past and have some freedom and transformation from, that usually is a pretty good thing to help keep you an understanding that and reduce the complacency that sometimes is easy to creep in, that, oh, wow, I've got this thing beat, or I have no problem with this, or whenever you see somebody else is struggling with it, it's pretty easy to see, oh, wow, but by the grace of God, I could easily fall back into that, and sort of keeps you on your toes a little bit. The more you, for me and my personal struggles, the more I preach it, the more I teach it, the more I help patients with it, the easier it is for me to be convicted to apply it, to my life more, and say, wow, boy, I'm telling Jeff about this, but that marital issue I'm struggling with as well. I need to, double down with what I'm doing in my marriage a little bit more to be able to address that. It's not good enough for me to just sort of teach it to others, but yet have it be a broken issue in my life as well. So it convicts us to be able to sort of know what some of our blind spots can be as we're sort of helping other people. God uses those people to show us what we need to be helped in. If it's an area where it could be triggering, the person is probably going to be triggered in other things, since there's usually other triggers around other than that person, to be able to trigger them in. And so if they're really struggling, they're going to be triggered anyways by other things, not just that particular individual. Usually helping somebody is something that allows you to have a little bit more autonomy, some confidence, some empowerment to be able to give you a little bit more victory over what you're, the issues that you're dealing with and struggling with and fighting.
I think I hear over and over, and we've talked about this a little bit before, how important a support system is.
Wait, I'm sorry, Megan, can I just go back to one thing? And so, sorry for interrupting, but so that's why whenever we, so as you talk, Jeff, about that person being triggered and helping, that's why that person doesn't want to stop getting their own therapy, their own treatment, being in their own support, because that's hopefully where they're processing some of those things with that team, with that person, so that they can get feedback of, hey, maybe you're getting too close, or maybe that is hitting home, or maybe that is a little bit triggering for you, right? They're not unbinding themselves. Hopefully they're helping unbind some people, but then they're also, getting unbinding from others in their life. So we don't want them to stop. Okay, now I've graduated to helping others. I don't need any help anymore. And I'm distancing myself from all those supports. We want to keep those supports in our life. And those are the kind of things you want to be able to continue to express to them and talk to them about, so they can, help you be on guard for those kind of situations. So sorry, I just wanted to, make that clear too.
No, I think that kind of answered a little bit what I was going to ask anyways. It's just like making sure we keep a support system around us. And that's going to include like professionals, that can include, family, trusted friends, those safe people in your life, but you've got to have those built around you. So I think if somebody's struggling, like find those people to come around you to help support you in this.
Yeah. One thing I always, give my patients as a homework assignment is to develop their board of directors, I call it. So just like, every corporation, it wants to do great things and they have a president, but then they also have a board of directors. That board of directors serves a key role. It evaluates the CEO. It corrects, it gives guidance, it gives advice, it cheerleads, it consoles, it allows for that CEO or president to express themselves, or to problem solve, to think out loud, to run things by. And so, I'm president of Corporation Karl Benzio, but if I don't have a board of directors, I'm not going to get very far as a corporation. So, we're really good at getting board members that are, I have a dentist because I'm not going to pull my own teeth. So I have a dentist that has dental expertise. I have an accountant because I don't want to run afoul of any tax law. So I have an accountant that that does my taxes. So in some of these external things, we're really good at, I got a landscaper that comes and, seeds and plants and does those kind of things, and my grass looks crappy. I don't do that on myself because I have no idea what the heck I'm doing. But in our inner space, in our personal life, we're usually not very good at figuring out, well, who's going to be on my board that give me that expertise? We don't want 10 psychiatrists on our board. No corporation would run very well if they had just 10 psychiatrists on the board and nobody else. So we'd like to pick different expertises and different skill sets to be on that board to round out all the different expertises that are needed for that corporation to move forward. So to have a marriage expert on your board of directors, somebody that that is a trusted person in your life, that, wow, they have a great track record. Their marriage is awesome. They seem to understand how to make marriage work, how to communicate, how to forgive each other, how to connect. I want that person on my board. They have a good track record and they can speak into my life and marriage. I want a parenting, somebody who has a good, they've raised their kids and they've been through some trials and tribulations parenting. They've been able to navigate those really well. They have expertise in that area. I want somebody who's been able to navigate addiction. I want somebody who's been able to manage, anger and emotional, ups and downs, or manage pain, or manage their finances. So we want all these different, board members. But then we need to be open and transparent with them. And we don't want to pick board members that are just yes people, that are going to tell me just what I want to hear, right? We want people that are going to be honest with us, that are willing to tell us the good things that we're doing, cheerlead with us, but also the things we're not doing well, how to be able to communicate that in a compassionate, caring, I love you, I care for you, but boy, hey, there's something I noticed that I'm curious as to why you're doing this, or why you're making that decision, or why you're falling into that struggle again. Let's talk that over. Let's try to problem solve in that. So yeah, board members that are able to do that. That's what that support system, again, Lazarus, we need unbinding. So we need those people. Ideally, we have people with various expertises that can come speak into us, that we don't have sort of the blind leading the blind. Obviously, a therapist, a support group that is, whether it's a Celebrate Recovery, whether it's a Recovery Alive, whether it's Overcomers in Christ. There's a whole bunch of different, support groups out there for people with addiction. And most of them aren't just for addiction, but really look at the idea that, hey, we're all in a recovery process. We're all trying to recover from sin in our life, from our, those idols of our heart that we pursue. So we're all on this psycho-spiritual journey. And so most of those Celebrate Recovery, even though they get pigeonholed as addiction support groups, they do much more than just addictions. They really reach into that deeper, well, what are my psychological and spiritual struggles that then lead to an addiction, lead to me self-medicating with power, control, pornography, scrolling through my, screens over and over, looking for affirmation. How many likes did I get? Or, boy, my life is terrible compared to this person who's always in Aruba and doing this and doing that and has a great hat every week and blah, blah, blah. So those are the kind of things that we're trying to, navigate, and to find those supports in various different areas from, and they don't have to be the expert, like I have to go to a parenting therapist, but I just need to look at somebody in my life who has a nice track record of being a good parent, a nice track record of a healthy marriage, to say, hey, would you be willing to speak into, I really admire what you had and what you've built and how you go about things. Would you be willing to speak into my life in some way, that if we meet for lunch, maybe twice a month kind of thing, that I can share with you some of the struggles that I might have? Are you open to that? And you'd be amazed at how many people are willing to help out people that are struggling and give that comfort they've been given. And again, pay it forward kind of thing.
I love that. And that's, even in my own life, I've done things like that. I never considered it a board of directors. And it's funny, like that actually really resonates with me, because I understand that framework very well. But there are guys where, literally I've got 3 guys, and my goal is to sit down with them once a month, and to have a face-to-face conversation, either in group or individual. But, my goal is to have a face-to-face conversation where we dig into that and hold each other accountable and have those hard conversations together, and addictions. And, it's interesting. There's a side conversation going on in the Twitch chat right now, centered around the difference between addictions and vices. And the thought was that vices is more like a coffee addiction or something that was a little more harmless. Miami Vice resonates in me, and I'm thinking Don Johnson and Coke. So, what is, I just, being here in Miami, of course, that's where I go. Crockett and Tubbs all the way. But tell me, what is there a difference between addictions and vice, and even, simple stuff like a coffee addiction? Is this something that we need to be worried about? Give us some inside tips here.
Oh man, you pricked a little thing in me, man, with caffeine. Caffeine, I hate caffeine. Honey Lake Clinic, we are a caffeine-free facility, but now they allow the patients 1 cup of coffee a day, and it pains me. Caffeine is the most common chemical addiction in the world. Even kids as young as 4, 5, 6 years old addicted to caffeine. Caffeine messes with your brain. It increases agitation, lowers frustration tolerance, increases irritability. It causes more stress. It decreases the blood flow to the brain. So over time, it worsens things in our brain. But it's amazing that, you would think the 2 places that addictions should not be happening would be work and church. And those are the 2 places we give it away for free. We give caffeine away for free, right? So, um, so a vice, to me, a vice or a bad habit is something where it only takes mild to moderate effort to cut down. Like, so if you really had to, you could. And it doesn't have as much, deleterious, impactful consequences, at least up front, as, some of the other addiction objects that we look at. But just like work, work is a significant addiction that a lot of guys have, especially, or addiction to productivity. And initially it doesn't start out that bad. It's a vice. Oh, that guy stays late. He works, but boy, the ripples it has whenever he's, the kids don't have a dad that's emotionally engaged with them, and what that sets them up to. It doesn't curse them for life, but boy, it puts them behind a lot, all the different measures of the outcomes of a person's life. The one key thing we always find is, did they have a father, male figure that was home and emotionally involved with them in their childhood? And so if a person's a workaholic, we might say, well, that's a vice. That's just a bad habit. That's just sort of the way they're wired, but it's not the way they're wired. They can change it. And it's not just a bad habit. It's something that's an addiction that has many other ripples in their life. We don't often think of addiction as being caused by a bacteria or a virus, but it's amazing how addictions are contagious and they infect the people in our lives that, have to live with that person who has, that addiction. So there's these long-term consequences. To me, short-term would be if I'm engaging with, if I can't get into a church service until I get my cup of coffee and, I'm thinking about worshiping God, but I need to get that. That's a problem. That's a problem. That's not putting God at the center of my universe. Somebody told me that the word for glorify and gravity in Greek are very similar root words. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'll go with it for this point. So that thing that we worship, that we glorify, we put at the center of the universe. And the center of the universe, the sun, is the thing that, because of its gravitational power, it forms the orbits of everything else. It causes the orbits and the rotation of all the other things in that person's life. So we have a lot of stress in our world. There's a lot of chaos, social media, technology. The truth is dying. People are believing in atrocities, and so are believing in absurdity, so they commit atrocities, as Voltaire said many, many centuries ago. But I think part of it is we have caffeine on every corner. So we have this addictive process that sort of fuels the pump, pries the dopamine pump, that we need to get stimulation all the time, and our irritability, our anxiety level, our stress level are increased. I think because, everybody's pumping in so much caffeine that there's some cause and effect of that. It's not the only cause, certainly, but anything that we have that's an addictive process makes it easier for us to fall prey to other addictions. And again, that atrophying of those other skills. So, if I need coffee to wake me up in the morning, then I don't really need to get a good night's sleep. So now I'm going to let my sleep hygiene decay, and I don't need to maybe do as much exercise to keep my weight down, because caffeine keeps my weight down. And so there's a lot of other ripples of how that interferes with our development of other better coping skills whenever we use an addiction object to go to our circumstantial stage, that helps us solve that problem in that particular circumstance.
That hurts on a lot of levels.
Well, I get a lot of youth pastors that'll go in and they're going to talk to these 13, 14-year-olds about porn and porn addiction and porn on the internet and all this stuff. But then they have this monster drink or their 5-hour energy drink, and they're saying, well, I'm late because I had to stop and get that, because I can't go a day without this. This is, but yet they're telling this kid, hey, you got to give up this. But then they're showing them, hey, I can't give up this. I mean, that's, what a mixed message that is for, a 13-year-old, right?
Yeah, guilty. Let me literally, my 13, I'm going to call myself out here. My 13-year-old son has a hard time staying awake in adult church. And so he's discovered Starbucks' dirty chai. It's a chai latte with a shot of espresso. That shot of espresso keeps him awake for church. And so I'm not going to lie. It's easier for us to do that. And buy that, so he gets the energy to stay awake through the sermon. And we have conversations about the sermon afterwards, and it's as a parent, my wife and I, we fell back on, okay, that's the easiest way to do it. We didn't even take into account the addiction, the fact that we're feeding that addiction right now, and that he's not developing something else that he needs to in order to compensate instead. We're complementing that with caffeine. My wife and I are both caffeine addicts, so
yeah, a lot of our country is. Yep, that's for sure.
Well, the funny, like we were literally out of college. I started at .com, and it was Christian church online.com, ebeliever.com, and we were either going to start an online.com or we were going to start a coffee shop. Like one of us, we fought out of college. Which one? And this is before Starbucks was Starbucks.
We'll do both.
And we fought which one of us was going to get the business, and I won.
Uh-huh.
But I love. This has been a very challenging conversation. I remember Megan. I think come on, all the conversations are running together. I don't remember if it was Mindy or who said it, but you are loved only to the level that you are known. I think that was a phrase that was said recently, either by Mindy or, oh my gosh, they're all just running together. But really, this idea of being known and having others know you, hold you accountable, be transparent with who you are and where you are. This is the idea that's resonating very much. Even as we're, doing ministry in these spaces that are addicting, dealing with people that are very open with their addiction. We talked about this recently. In digital, there's two different ways to do digital ministry, in my opinion. And there's the broadcast idea. We've got people that are engaging with the outside world, like, church is engaging with the outside world, the 1 hour on Sunday. And that's, when we talk about addiction with those people, they don't often see a lot of the addiction or a lot of the mental health challenges or a lot of the suicidal crisis because, to be honest, that 1 hour of Sunday, even online, people have a mask, they're hiding behind it.
Well, the Christian 4-letter F word is fine. Hey, how you doing today?
Ooh.
Oh, I'm fine. How are you? Oh, I'm fine too. Okay, good. Hey, I'll see you next week, right? That's a Christian 4-letter F word. Dr.
Karl, that is tattoo worthy. I know there's a running joke on the show. Is a statement good enough for you to put your name tattooed on my body? And the Christian 4-letter F word, fine. Do you own that? Is that you or is that somebody else? Is that your saying?
I've never heard anybody else say it, no.
Dr. Karl, that is in the running. My wife will, of course, say no, so I'll have to sneak out one day and get it when she's not, which may open up some other issues, but that's another podcast for a different day.
That's why I say the opposite of addiction is belonging, because if we're not transparent, right, if we don't open up, if we don't show people who we are, and part of that addiction issue is that if they really knew me, they wouldn't like me. They wouldn't hang out with me. They wouldn't connect with me, and I wouldn't belong. So That's what we're trying to do is, well, how do we help people belong? That would, so for treating, well, if we put them in prison, well, now we're just sort of continuing to segregate them away and say, boy, you never will belong, right? And I'm not saying there shouldn't be consequences when we do inappropriate things, but trying to figure out how we can put that in a context of connection and belonging. I think we'd get a lot farther in the process, just like you're saying that transparency, how to be open. You're only going to be loved as far as you're going to be able to be open.
Yeah, look, just a flat cap to wrap up here. Flat cap's asking a question in chat. Does FOMO, fear of missing out, play into addictions? Like, what's the parallel there that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think there's a we have this dopamine reward pathway, and we want it to be stimulated. We want dopamine to be released instead of just a slow drip of just little small things that give us a little bit of satisfaction, a smile on my wife's face. Well, there's a little bit of dopamine, but I want big dopamine drips. And so in FOMO is, well, I'm going to miss out on a big dopamine drip. I'm going to, or a big dopamine surge kind of thing. Yeah. And I don't want to miss out. I need stimulation. I need to be, in the middle of things. I need to be part of, something. They're looking for that belonging, but belonging isn't just because you're in something that you didn't miss out on. Belonging is really connecting relationally, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually with somebody. I can be in 1/10 of the activities with my kids that they're involved in, but I could still have really strong connections in a sense of they belong to me and I belong to them and we belong together kind of thing, without being involved in every single activity. Right. And so I think FOMO is that need to artificially feel like you're belonging whenever there's a lot of other better ways to be able to do that. And that dopamine surge isn't as necessary. We can have a little bit more self-control and a little bit more patience to wait for the drip and understand how the drip works actually better in the long run than episodic surges.
What is, oh my gosh, I feel like I could go another hour. Okay. Everything I hear about dopamine is getting it in a negative context. Like, you're getting that dopamine hit by the doom scrolling. You're getting that dopamine hit with pornography. Is there a healthy way to get dopamine, or is dopamine?
Yeah.
Like, what is that? Tell me a healthy way to get. Everybody's negative on dopamine. Give me a positive way.
Hey, if you're married, have sex with your spouse. You get a great dopamine surges with that. Go exercise, great dopamine surges. Just look at a picture of your grandchild or your child smiling at you. That's a little dopamine, a dopamine drip. Having a dopamine drip that's relatively consistent is a lot better and healthier for you than getting episodic surges of dopamine because you're, taking a hit of cocaine, or you're looking at pornography, or you're masturbating, or you're stealing something, or you'll get a dopamine surge from some of those kind of things, but that's not a healthy, your system wasn't meant to tolerate those kind of episodic surges. Your system was really built to take, a sort of a continuous drip by finding joy in all the different things that we do that God brings into our life.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, so dopamine is a good thing. We want dopamine. Dopamine is great. We just don't want these blasts of dopamine, or for a person to be so immune to the little dopamine hits that they get. Sometimes our radar is, whenever we get these big dopamine blasts, we have very poor radar for the subtler dopamine bounces that we get, right? And so those don't register because, well, that was a 2 on the dopamine scale. I want a 75. And if it ain't a 75, anything less than 50 just ain't worth it. Well, no, and that's why that tolerance of, I need to get back to that original euphoria. So we need to use more and more and more and more to be able to get that, that dopamine surge that we initially had when we first used that particular addiction object. That's not what we were designed to do. That's corrupted chemistry that unfortunately we get trapped in.
Megan, as we're wrapping up, is this making sense? Where are we at?
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think it's been really good and really informative for people who maybe are struggling, or people who are, working with people who are struggling in those areas. And I think, like you said, we all can find a little area that we might need to just keep an eye on and make sure that it doesn't go into something that's taking us out of reality, basically. So no, I've loved this. Thank you, Dr. Karl, for being a part of this and really just bringing your wealth of knowledge.
And if your team, if the viewers have questions, or there's things that they resonate, they want to talk, I'd love to be able to come back. I just have my senior team, calling me saying, hey, from Honey Lake Clinic, hey, are you coming to the meeting or not? At 2 o'clock.
All right. So we're going to wrap up. This has been great. But Dr. Karl, thank you very much for the podcast here. We're going to let you go. But for Dr. Karl, for Megan, this is Jeff with theChurch.digital. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast, and we'll see you next time on the show. Y'all have a good one.